is near its capacity? Well, first of all, before it gets there, you're going to get alerts and monitors that says that'll say Claire underscore R1 is below a certain threshold. So you're going to get an email or a page basically telling you that it has reached a percentage that is 90% full, or 90% full. So what you can do would be to order additional disks. We would place them in the rack. We would rack them and stack them, and that net new disk would be added to the pool. So if you added 2 terabytes, next time you create a file system, you'll see the 2 terabytes. So very, very easy in terms of growing this pool. And of course, you have multiple options in terms of pools: a RAID 1 pool, a RAID 5 pool, a RAID 6 pool, so that dual parity. You also have some other type of other options in terms of pools. Okay, so size of the file system is going to be 200 megs. The next items here, the next set of features are really to help the storage administrator from a day in and day out perspective. And I say that because if you enable auto extend and the watermark is 90%, what that basically is telling us that if this particular file system reaches 180 megs or 90%, I'm going to automatically extend it by 10%. Now that's just the default. You can pick a range in terms of how much you want to extend. But in essence, by enabling this, by setting this high watermark at 90%, you as a storage administrator will get a page that says FS1 has just grown by 10%, versus you getting an email that says FS1 has reached capacity. I have to stop what I'm doing, log on to the system, extend this file system by X%. So it's a little automation that's built into the system. Okay, virtually provisioned. Remember we talked about that. Virtually provisioned is I'm going to give the illusion that this particular file system, when I actually mount it or map it, is going to have 100 gigs. But in actuality, I've only actually allocated 200. So again, that's kind of that illusion. So with these two options, the extend, the high watermark, and again the virtual provisioning max here, you have the ability of really making things easy for you. The slice basically represents that when I create this file system, I want you to go into the disk subsystem, and I want you to do what we call as a rule of 4. So I'm going to create this file system across multiple RAID groups. So I'm going across multiple spindles and across multiple shelves, and then I'm going to create a slice. So in other words, I'm going to get the best possible performance. I'm going to have load balancing across the SPs. I'm going to leverage the buses on the Clarion. So again, it's going to give me the best performance possible by selecting that slice volumes or enabling that slice volumes. Next item is the FLR, file level retention, and we talked about this a little bit. The thing that we've added as of March the 2nd is this compliance component. So by selecting compliant, now FS1, which is 200 megs, virtually provisioned, is really hardened. In other words, I can't come back into this file system and delete unless the retention of the files have expired. Okay. Lastly, mount point. What that basically refers to is we maintain both sets of permissions. So, for example, if I have a customer client who during the day, during business hours, they come in and they're using, say, Red Hat, say they're using Linux operating system, and they authenticate using the permission bit. After they're done, they close up lock down their desktop, they go home, they log on using Windows XP. What we're setting up here is, specifically when we're mounting this file system, we're not bouncing back and forth between when I log on as a Unix, when I log on as Windows, we're not bouncing back and forth in terms of those permissions. We harden those permissions, which means when I went home and I logged on and I tried to access this particular share file system, I have to authenticate against that ACL within Windows. So this is very, very important, specifically if you've got sensitive information that I have a certain community can come into this information, certain community or client base cannot. So we have the ability of maintaining both permissions. At this point, I'm going to click on default. At this point, I hit OK, and we've just created a file system using the storage pool, in this case RAID 1, that's 200 megs with virtually provision enabled, and using kind of the default in terms of the permissions and ACLs there. Okay, so now you'll see that as part of my list here. So here's the file system here. Okay. The next thing is the next thing would be to how do I present that to my client. What I've done is kind of going backwards. I've created a file system called dedupe. I've exported that file system and I've mounted it onto a Windows 2003 server here. So let me go ahead and minimize that. I went to my computer. I have mapped these drives in. Here's the drive now. I've got a couple of files and folders within that guy. So again, what I've done here is I've created a file system. I've exported that file system from a client perspective. I've mapped that file system. I authenticated using Active Directory to make sure that I have privileges to actually look inside of this file system and directory. So again, that was just a basic right-click, map where network drive, and again, very easy to do. You guys do this all day long. Okay, so the couple of things that I want to point out here are this particular file system. If you take a look across here, the size is almost a gig. Free space 479 megs. So let's do a couple of things with this file system and key in on a couple of those concepts, a couple of those features that I talked about. Let's go back to the Solera Manager, and this is a file system that I've exported and mounted on that particular client. That's what we're seeing here in my computer. So let's go ahead and double click here on that file system, and let's do a couple of things. One is, if you notice here, I purposely did not enable the virtual provisioning. Okay, so this file system, when I created this file system, it's about a gig. Okay, now by checking auto extend, enabling virtual provisioning, and giving the illusion to the customer that it's actually bigger than it actually is, by simply checking virtual provisioning and setting that high watermark and hit OK. So what I've done now is I've only really allocated 1 gig, but I've tricked the end user, so to speak. I don't know if necessarily that's the right word, but I've given the illusion to the end user that they now have a larger amount. So if you go back to my computer, if you look at that file system now,